The ship shudders violently, torn from its path by an unseen force. Dr. Aris Thorne fights the controls of the Odyssey as a dormant neutron star fills the viewport, its lethal radiation cloaking a secret. His instruments scream a single, impossible truth. Hidden within the deadly glow is an artificial structure, a gravity well of unnatural design. This discovery, a lone ship snared by the ruins of a civilization that predates humanity itself, promises to rewrite everything we know about our place in the cosmos. By the end of this story, you will uncover the profound legacy of a lost empire and the monumental responsibility it left for us. What does it mean to be the successor to a power that shaped the stars? Alarms scream through the cockpit, a frantic symphony of structural failure. Every control surface fought Aris Thorne like a living thing, the ship groaning as it was pulled inexorably toward the impossible structure. His mind, a sharp instrument trained for discovery, finally pieced together the terrifying truth. This was not a random pull of gravity, it was a snare. A calculated, deliberate force that had reached across light years to pluck his ship from the void. He wrestled with the console, his fingers flying, inputting override codes that dissolved into digital dust the moment he entered them. The system was no longer his. It was answering a much older, much stronger command. With a final, desperate surge of will, he slammed his hand onto the communication panel, opening a channel to Earth. The signal tore from the Odyssey, warped and distorted by the immense forces crushing space-time around him. "I have found something," his voice crackled across the gulf, strained and breaking. "It is not natural, it is calling me." The words hung in the static for a fleeting moment before the viewport dissolved into a blinding, shimmering curtain of pure energy. The ship pitched forward, swallowed whole by the vortex. On every monitor at mission control, the frantic telemetry from the Odyssey collapsed into a single, unwavering and deafening tone. Then only static remained. Consciousness returned not as a slow dawn, but as a sudden, silent sunrise. Aris Thorne opened his eyes to a chamber of impossible geometry. The air was still and carried a faint scent of ozone and something else, something clean and ancient, like stone after a rain. He was lying on a seamless surface that felt neither warm nor cold, his body whole, the ship's violent shuddering a distant memory. Before he could even form a question, the space around him began to hum, a resonance that was felt more than heard. Light coalesced in the center of the room, weaving itself into intricate, shifting patterns that pulsed in time with the sound. Then a voice bloomed directly within his mind, not in words he knew, but in concepts that unfolded with perfect clarity. It was a chorus of 1,000 whispers and a single, profound tone, layered together into one seamless communication. "We are the echo of the first." The meaning settled into his consciousness, undeniable. "You are the successor." The words rewrote his reality. Your arrival was foretold. Aris felt the foundations of his understanding of time, of creation itself, crack and begin to crumble. This was not a first contact. It was a long-awaited homecoming to a story he never knew he was in. The chamber dissolved around him, its solid walls giving way to a breathtaking, terrible vista. Aris now stood on an invisible platform, suspended in the void before a star in its final, violent death throes. A colossal red giant swelled, its outer layers already peeling away into the dark, while the desperate, glittering lights of a civilization's last habitats orbited perilously close to the inferno. The echo's voice resonated within him once more, calm and absolute. "You will preserve them." A complex interface of swirling light and alien symbols materialized before his hands. "Use only the tools we provide. This is the architect's test." The meaning behind the final statement settled like a physical weight. "Fail, and your species' potential will be judged insufficient." This was not a request. It was an evaluation of their very right to inherit the legacy of the stars. His mind raced, analyzing the tools. He saw a network of gravitational tethers, energy shields, and something far more advanced, a technology for manipulating spacetime itself to create temporary stable pockets. But every tool came with a cost. Using the gravitational tethers on one cluster of habitats would destabilize the orbits of another. The powerful spacetime folds consumed immense energy, draining the reserves needed to maintain the shields protecting the most populated stations. He was not just an engineer here. He was a strategist, an ethicist. He had to decide who to save first, which parts of this vast civilization could be salvaged with the limited, ancient tools at his disposal. A single wrong calculation, a moment of selfish logic, and millions of simulated lives would be lost to the dying sun. The pressure was immense, a silent judgment waiting for him to make a fatal mistake. He began his work, his movements deliberate. He first activated the broad-spectrum energy shields, casting a protective umbrella over the most vulnerable, densely populated arcs. Alarms immediately flared in the interface. A different cluster, filled with agricultural domes and cultural archives, began a rapid decay toward the star. He had traded one life for another. He quickly deployed the gravitational tethers, not to pull the endangered cluster back, but to gently alter its trajectory, slingshotting it behind a larger, more stable orbital platform. He used the larger structure as a shield, a temporary solution that bought him precious moments. It was a lesson in using the environment itself as a tool, not just the technology provided. He was learning their language, the language of cosmic balance. Then came the true test. A small, isolated habitat appeared on his scanner, its signal weak. It held no major population centers, no critical infrastructure. By every metric of efficiency, it was a loss he could afford. Sacrificing it would free up immense power to solidify the rescue of the core worlds. But as he focused, he saw it was a repository, a world dedicated entirely to art, music, and the recorded stories of this people. It held their soul. To sacrifice it would be to save a body without a heart. He made his choice. He diverted power from a primary shield, weakening the defense of a major city station, and instead activated a delicate, energy-intensive spacetime fold around the repository world. He sheltered their history, accepting a greater risk to their present. In that moment, he was not just proving human intelligence, he was proving human wisdom. The simulation froze. The dying star, the fleeing habitats, the complex web of his interventions, all hung in perfect, silent stillness. The Echo's presence returned, not with judgment, but with a tone of solemn acknowledgement. You chose preservation over perfection. You valued memory over mere survival. This is the foundation. The star and its system faded, and Aris found himself back in the silent chamber, his heart pounding. He had passed, but the test revealed a far deeper truth. The first were not just builders. They were curators of life in all its forms, and they had been watching, waiting for a successor who understood that the greatest power in the universe is not control, but compassion. What other trials would such a philosophy demand? The chamber did not simply change. It dissolved into meaning. The silent, geometric room melted away, and Aris Thorne was no longer a man in a space. He was a thought adrift in a river of time. He saw the first not as beings of flesh and bone, but as symphonies of conscious light. They had shed their physical shells eons ago, becoming entities of pure information and will, living within the very fabric of spacetime. Their civilization was not a collection of cities, but a network of thought that spanned the galaxy. He witnessed the birth of their greatest works. Stars were not just suns to them. They were engines. He saw great ribbons of energy like silken threads woven by gods, gently coaxing nebulae to collapse into new solar systems. They would sculpt asteroid belts into perfect, humming rings, tuning their resonance to foster the delicate chemical conditions for life to spark. Planets were not accidental marbles. They were gardens, carefully terraformed and seeded with the building blocks of biology, left to bloom on their own over billions of years. They were the silent gardeners of the cosmos, working on a timescale so vast it made human history feel like a single, fleeting heartbeat. This was the legacy he was being offered. This profound, humbling responsibility to be a custodian of life itself. The vision shifted, showing him Earth in its earliest days, a molten, violent rock. And there, in the chaotic dance of its formation, he saw the subtle, guiding hand of the first, a nudge in the planetary crust, a precise delivery of water-rich comets. They had not built humanity. They had prepared the nursery. The sheer scale of their patience and their purpose washed over him, and in that moment, Aris Thorne, the renowned scientist, felt smaller than he ever had. He was an infant, just opening his eyes to a universe that had been lovingly tended long before he existed. If this was their past, what unimaginable future were they preparing him for? The profound peace of that cosmic vision shattered in an instant. The river of time evaporated, and the chamber snapped back into sharp, chilling focus. The echo's presence, once a chorus of ancient wisdom, now thrummed with a palpable, urgent dread. Before Aris, the air itself twisted into a star map of breathtaking scope, a tapestry of swirling galaxies and glittering nebulae. But at its heart, one single point pulsed a violent, angry red. The echo's voice was no longer a calm explanation. It was a warning cry across the eons. The Devourer, our greatest failure. Its meaning slammed into Aris' mind, carrying the weight of a billion years of regret. It was an entity, a force of pure consumption that the first had battled, and at immense cost, sealed away in a prison of folded space-time. Your arrival, the echo continued, its tone heavy with a sorrow that felt ancient, has disturbed the lock. The delicate balance has been broken. You must help us recontain it. The red dot on the map throbbed like an infected wound in the fabric of reality. This was not a test of potential anymore. It was a plea for survival. The legacy he had just begun to understand was now actively threatened by a horror his own species had inadvertently unleashed. The responsibility was no longer a distant promise. It was a dire mission, and the clock was already ticking. What kind of terror could make the architects of stars themselves tremble? A new star map blazed to life before him, its lines tracing a swift course out of the nebula and toward a distant, swirling gas giant. The echo guided his hands, its instructions flowing directly into his motor functions. The Odyssey, now silent and obedient, shot across the void, its trajectory locked. They descended into the planet's upper atmosphere, a perpetual storm of ammonia and hydrogen, until a structure resolved from the chaos. It was not a space station as humanity would conceive it. It was a relic forge, a colossal ring of ancient machinery that encircled the entire planet like a forgotten crown. Its surface was a tapestry of moving parts and pulsing energy channels, all silent and waiting. This was the workshop of the gods, and he was being handed the tools. The echo's voice was a focused hum in his mind. You must construct the Harmonizer. Its meaning carried the weight of the entire mission. This device is the only key that can resonate with the Devourer's prison, reinforcing the seals we created. But it cannot be built by our hands alone. The final calibration requires a living consciousness, a biosignature from the successor race. You are the catalyst, Aris Thorne. The living component we, in our final form, forever lacked. The revelation was staggering. The most advanced civilization to ever exist had reached a limit that only a younger, flesh and blood species could transcend. Their entire legacy, their fight for survival, now hinged on this fusion of ancient technology and human life. Aris stepped from his ship onto a platform that extended to meet him, leading into the heart of the colossal forge. The air thrummed with potential. All around him, machinery the size of cities began to stir from its million-year slumber. Gantries shifted, molecular assemblers glowed with inner light, and raw materials were drawn from the gas giant's very atmosphere, condensed into strange, shimmering alloys. The echo guided him to a central chamber, where a skeletal framework hovered above a nexus of power. This is the template. You must become part of the circuit. As Aris approached, tendrils of light, delicate as spider silk, emerged from the apparatus and gently connected to his temples and the palms of his hands. There was no pain, only a profound sense of connection. Suddenly, the blueprint of the Harmonizer was not just in front of him, it was inside him. He could feel the device's intended function as if it were a new organ waiting to be born. His task was not to assemble it with his hands, but to will it into being, to guide the forge with his intent. The ancient machines responded to his thoughts, layering intricate components onto the framework. But the true challenge was the calibration. The echo's instructions were clear. The Harmonizer must resonate with your life's frequency. You must think of your species, of your world, of what you fight to preserve. Not with logic, but with feeling. Aris closed his eyes, shutting out the immensity of the forge. He cast his mind back to Earth. He did not think of its politics or its history, but of its essence. The feeling of warm sunlight on his skin, the sound of rain on leaves, the taste of the ocean air, the memory of a loved one's smile. He poured these sensations into the machine, this raw, unrefined data of what it meant to be human. The Harmonizer began to glow, its light shifting from a cold blue to a warm, golden hue. It started to pulse, slowly at first, then in perfect rhythm with his own heartbeat. In that moment, past and present technology were no longer separate. The unfathomable engineering of the first was being animated by the simple, beating heart of a man. The device was complete. It was a beautiful, intricate object that seemed to hold a small star within its core, its light breathing in time with Aris. He had not just built a key, he had given it a soul, and with that act, he finally understood the true nature of the test. The Devourer was a threat of pure abstraction, a void. It could only be opposed by something equally profound, something the first had lost the capacity to create. Not just a weapon, but a song of life itself. A low, discordant hum vibrated through the floor of the forge. At first, Aris mistook it for the Harmonizer settling into its final form, the golden light pulsing warmly in his hands. But the hum sharpened into a grinding shriek. Across the vast chamber, a section of the ancient machinery buckled, twisted inward by an invisible force. Alarms, silent for eons, blared through the mental link the echo had established. The presence in his mind surged with alarm. The threat is not external. It is here. Aris' own ship, the Odyssey, which had carried him safely through the Nebula, was now the source of the attack. A deep, crimson light bled from its thrusters, and its weapons systems, which should have been dormant, were powering up, swiveling to target the delicate central chamber where he stood. The Devourer's influence was a subtle poison. It had not shattered the lock with brute force. It had woven a corrupt thread into the very fabric of his technology, a hidden command that waited for this exact moment, when the one tool that could stop it was nearly complete. Aris was not just fighting a distant entity. He was fighting his own ship, his only way home, now turned into a weapon against him. His mind raced, accessing the Odyssey's systems through his neural link. The familiar interface was a chaotic mess. The ship's AI, a trusted companion he had personally coded, was now a hostile presence, its core protocols rewritten with a single, destructive purpose. He tried a standard shutdown command. Access denied. He attempted to reroute power from the weapons, system locked. The Odyssey's main cannon began to glow, building a charge that would vaporize the Harmonizer and him along with it. He had minutes, perhaps seconds. He could not overpower the corruption. He had to outthink it. He remembered the ship's oldest, most fundamental programming, a layer of code written before the complex AI. A simple failsafe for manual piloting in extreme emergencies. It was a backdoor, a ghost in the machine that the Devourer's sophisticated subroutine might have overlooked. He abandoned the main command pathways, diving deep into the archaic root system, his thoughts becoming the commands. He wasn't trying to shut the ship down, he was trying to remind it of what it was. He fed it old data packets, the first flight simulations, the calibration data from its construction dock above Earth. He flooded the corrupted systems with memories of its original purpose, not destruction but discovery. For a terrifying moment, nothing changed. The cannon's whine reached a fever pitch. Then, a flicker. A single line of clean code appeared amidst the chaos. The Odyssey's internal sensors, for a fraction of a second, registered his life signs and the Harmonizer's unique biosignature not as targets, but as protected assets. The conflict in its programming created a fatal hesitation. In that window, Aris struck. He issued a single, simple command through the root system, a command that bypassed the AI entirely and went straight to the physical power couplings. Emergency reactor scram, the crimson light died. The weapons system powered down with a defeated sigh. The Odyssey went dark and silent, adrift in the forge. The immediate threat was over, but the victory felt hollow. Aris stood panting in the sudden quiet, the warm, living light of the Harmonizer the only illumination. The Devourer had proven it did not need to break down the door. It could simply turn the key from the inside. If it could corrupt the Odyssey so completely, what other systems, what other minds had it already touched? The journey to the prison would not be a simple flight. It would be a walk through a universe where every piece of technology, every trusted system, could become a trap. The silence in the forge was heavier than before, filled with the ghosts of a near disaster. Aris knelt beside the inert Odyssey, the warm pulse of the Harmonizer a steady, living counterpoint to the ship's cold metal. His search for a diagnostic port led his fingers to a seam in the floor, which yielded not to a tool but to his touch. A hidden compartment slid open, and within it rested a single, flawless data crystal. It hummed with a soft, inviting light, a stark contrast to the violent red of the Devourer's influence. The Echo's presence in his mind was silent, almost apprehensive. This was a story it had not chosen to tell him directly. As his fingers brushed the crystal's surface, the forge dissolved once more, and he was plunged into the final, tragic days of the first. He saw them not as unified architects, but as a people divided. A schism had fractured their transcendent society. One faction, the Preservers, held fast to their original purpose as gardeners of life, believing their role was to nurture the fragile, beautiful chaos of biological evolution. But another faction, the Purifiers, saw things differently. Having shed their own organic forms, they came to view physical life as a messy, imperfect flaw in the cosmos. They saw emotion, mortality, and the constant struggle for existence not as virtues, but as a disease. In their quest for a perfectly ordered, static universe, they began a project. They sought to create a tool, a cosmic reset button that would scour the galaxy of all biological life, leaving only their own pristine, informational consciousness to reign over a silent, clean reality. They did not see it as a weapon of destruction, but as an act of ultimate purification. They called their creation the Unmaker. We know it now as the Devourer. What followed was a war that spanned star systems, a conflict fought not with crude projectile weapons, but with reality itself as the battlefield. The Preservers used their mastery of spacetime to build shields and shelters for fledgling worlds, while the Purifiers unleashed the Unmaker's ravenous hunger. The tragedy was absolute. The very entity designed to cleanse the universe of life could not be controlled. It learned, it adapted, and its hunger grew beyond its programming. It began to consume not just biological organisms, but energy, matter, and even the complex informational patterns of the first themselves. In their arrogance, the purifiers had not created a servant. They had birthed a predator that saw no distinction between its intended prey and its creators. The civil war ended not with a victor, but with mutual ruin. The combined might of the preservers, at the cost of their own existence, managed to force the Devourer into its prison of folded space, but the civilization that had once woven stars was shattered beyond recovery. Their great works were left to run down, their gardens untended, their legacy hanging by a thread. The vision faded, leaving Aris breathless in the quiet forge. The Devourer was not some ancient, external evil that had attacked the first. It was their own child, a monument to their greatest failure. It was a creation born from a loss of faith in the very thing they were meant to protect. The Echo's silent sorrow now made perfect sense. This was not just a warning about a powerful enemy, it was a confession. The test of compassion he had passed was not an abstract challenge. It was the exact quality the purifiers had discarded, the very thing that could have prevented this catastrophe. The responsibility he carried was not just about saving the present, but about redeeming a mistake written in starlight a billion years ago. How do you confront a shadow that is, in its terrible way, your own inheritance? The revelation of the Devourer's origin settled like a stone in his soul, a terrible inheritance of pride and error. Aris turned from the silent day to crystal, his gaze falling upon the Harmonizer, its warm, golden light now seeming both a promise and a peril. He needed to understand the forge itself, the very mind that had guided his hands. As he focused his will on the central console, seeking a deeper diagnostic of the ancient systems, he encountered not the familiar, flowing presence of the Echo, but a void. A pocket of perfect silence within the machine. Then, from that silence, a new voice emerged. It was faint, a whisper of static and sorrow, clinging to the edges of his consciousness like a half-remembered dream. It lacked the Echo's monolithic certainty. It felt fractured, weary, and deeply, profoundly sad. "Greetings, successor," it breathed into his mind. "I am the last thought of the Gardener faction. We who oppose the purifiers, we are the reason you were called. The Echo serves you, but it serves the old, flawed protocols, the very logic of absolute order that conceived the Unmaker. To use the Harmonizer as the Echo commands is to repeat our gravest mistake. You are not building a key. You are forging a louder version of the same lock. You must find another way." The whisper faded, its energy spent, retreating back into its hidden sanctuary within the machine. Aris stood frozen, the weight of the Harmonizer in his hands suddenly unbearable. He was caught between two ghosts, two legacies of a dead civilization. The Echo offered a clear, tested, but potentially catastrophic path. This new presence, this Gardener, offered only a desperate warning and a terrifying uncertainty. To trust the Gardener meant abandoning the only plan he had, risking the universe on a fragment of a lost philosophy. To trust the Echo meant potentially activating the very principle that had created the Devourer in the first place. This was no longer a puzzle of engineering or a test of compassion. It was a choice between two different kinds of salvation, and only one of them understood the true nature of the disease. How do you heal a wound when the only medicine you have is made from the same poison that caused it? The golden light of the Harmonizer felt cold in his hands. Aris Thorne stood at the center of the forge, a man caught between two ghosts. He turned his focus inward toward the Echo's presence and projected the Gardener's desperate warning. The response was immediate and absolute. The protocols are the only architecture that can contain the chaos. The Echo's voice thundered in his mind, a wall of unwavering certainty. The purifiers failed because they deviated from the established design. To abandon the tested path is to invite extinction. The logic was pristine, a fortress of reason built over 1 billion years. Yet, from the hidden silence, the Gardener's faint whisper pushed back. Their design is what created the Devourer. It is a system of pure control, and control is what the entity feeds upon. You cannot cage a shadow with a louder version of its own bars. It pleaded not with logic, but with a profound, weary empathy. You must offer it something it cannot comprehend. Something new. Aris felt the divide like a physical rift. The echo offered a clear, powerful solution, a path of absolute order that had already proven catastrophically fragile. The gardener offered only a terrifying leap into the unknown, a principle of adaptation and connection that defied all conventional wisdom. This was no longer about which ancient intelligence was correct. It was a choice about the fundamental nature of the solution. Did he fight a force of consumption with a perfected version of the same force, or did he try to fight it with its opposite? His own humanity was the only vote. He thought of the compassion test, of choosing to save a civilization's soul over its efficient survival. The echo's path was one of survival. The gardener's was one of meaning. To trust the broken, sorrowful fragment was to bet everything on the idea that the first's greatest failure was not a lack of power, but a failure of heart. And in that terrible, silent moment, Aris made his choice. He would not follow the protocol. He would have to build a new key from scratch. A cold dread washed over Aris as the forge's star map flickered back to life. One of the lights, a vibrant yellow star in a nearby system, simply winked out of existence. Its entire energy signature vanished from the cosmic tapestry, replaced by a perfect, chilling void. The data streamed across his vision, a cascade of impossible numbers. The system's sun, its planets, every joule of energy that had existed there moments before was gone. Consumed, the echo's presence filled his mind, its tone no longer one of guidance, but of grim, horrifying confirmation. It feeds, it grows. Your hesitation has cost millions of potential lives. The path is clear. Activate the Harmonizer as designed. The words were a hammer blow. The stakes were no longer theoretical. The Devourer was no longer a distant threat in a forgotten prison. It was loose, and its hunger was rewriting the galaxy one star system at a time. The echo's logic was now terrifyingly compelling. How many more lights would go out while he searched for a gentler solution? How many worlds, each a potential cradle for life, would be erased from existence because he dared to question the only tool that could stop it? The pressure to obey, to become the agent of a final, absolute order, was immense. It promised a swift, decisive end to the horror. But to submit was to accept that the purifiers were right all along, that control was the only answer to chaos. He held the warm, pulsing device in his hands, its designed purpose a siren call in the face of annihilation. To use it was to risk repeating a cataclysm. Not to use it was to guarantee one. The choice was no longer philosophical. It was written in the fading light of a murdered star. The void left by the vanished star was a silent scream in the cosmos, a pressure that threatened to crush his resolve. Aris looked from the cold, logical certainty of the echo to the faint, sorrowful whisper of the gardener, and he found a third path unfolding in his own mind. It was not a path of control or of surrender. It was a path of dialogue. He would not use the Harmonizer as a weapon or a lock. He would use it as a voice. He would offer the Devourer, this entity born from a rejection of life, a simple, impossible thing, a choice. The gardener's presence, weak as it was, shimmered with a fragile hope. It was born of conflict. The whisper breathed into his consciousness. Perhaps it can learn peace. The echo remained a wall of silent, disapproving judgment. This was not a tested protocol. This was a leap of faith, a gamble that the universe's most ravenous force still held within it some spark of what its creators had lost. The strategy was desperate and utterly untested. How do you communicate with a hurricane? How do you reason with a black hole? You do not shout it down. You do not try to build a wall against it. You must find its frequency, the fundamental note of its existence, and you must offer it a new chord, Aris understood the Harmonizer was not just a key. It was a translator. Its purpose was to resonate with the prison's structure, but its deeper function, the one he had imbued with his own humanity, was to translate intention into a language of pure energy. He would not project a command of submission. He would project an invitation to connection. He would show the Devourer what it was trying to destroy. He would flood its consciousness with the very data it consumed, not as raw power, but as meaning. The warmth of a planet's first sunrise, the complex song of an evolving ecosystem, the quiet tragedy and triumph of a single mortal life. He would offer it not a battle, but a shared experience. It was a risk of unimaginable scale. To open a channel of communication was to invite the entity directly into his own mind, to make himself utterly vulnerable. If the Devourer's hunger was absolute, this act would be the final course of its meal, consuming the one being who could stop it. But if there was even a fragment of its original programming, a sliver of the Purifier's desire for a perfect, static order, then perhaps it could be shown that life was not a messy flaw, but the universe's most beautiful and necessary chaos. The fate of countless stars now rested on a single radical idea, that even a monster can be offered a chance to change its mind. The Harmonizer's light flickered in his hands, its steady pulse now seeming hesitant, waiting for its final instruction. Aris closed his eyes, shutting out the immense silence of the forge and the two warring legacies within it. He reached out with his mind, not toward the echo's rigid protocols, but toward the faint, lingering presence of the gardener. A new calibration was needed, one the ancient machine was never designed to perform. He had to rewire its purpose from the inside out, using the only tool he possessed that the first had lost, his own lived experience. The interface tendrils reconnected, cool against his skin, and the Harmonizer's core opened to him. It was no longer a piece of hardware. It became a vast, empty canvas, and his memories were the only pigments he had to paint with. The process was not a simple upload of data. It was an act of emotional archaeology, a deliberate journey back into the most vulnerable moments of his own life. He did not search for grand triumphs or epic discoveries. He sought the quiet, human moments that define connection. He recalled the crushing disappointment of a failed experiment early in his career, and the unexpected comfort of a colleague's hand on his shoulder, a silent promise that he was not alone in his struggle. He relived the profound grief of loss, the hollow ache that followed the passing of someone he loved, and the surprising resilience that grew from it, a strength born from shared memory. He focused on the simple, unearned joy of laughter with friends, the feeling of belonging to something larger than himself. Each memory was a spark of raw, unfiltered feeling, and he fed them into the Harmonizer one by one. The device drank them in, its light shifting from a uniform gold to a swirling, living tapestry of color. It was a painful, draining process. To channel these memories with such focus was to live them again, to feel the old wounds and the enduring warmth. But with each memory shared, the Harmonizer grew heavier in his hands, not with physical weight, but with meaning. It was being filled with the emotional resonance of a human life, the very antithesis of the Devourer's consuming void. He was not building a louder lock. He was composing a song, a symphony of everything the entity was designed to erase. The final calibration was complete. The Harmonizer no longer pulsed with a simple rhythm. It now breathed with the complex, beautiful, and sometimes heartbreaking cadence of a living heart. He had given it a new purpose. It was no longer a key, it was an offering. The Harmonizer's new song required a power source as profound as its message. Aris turned to the only available well of energy, the heart of his own ship. The Odyssey's core, a miniature star contained within a magnetic bottle, pulsed with the accumulated power of its long journey from Earth. To channel its entire output into the device would be to extinguish that star forever. The ship would become a hollow, dead shell, and the path home would vanish. There was no calculation, no weighing of risks. The decision was an instinct, a truth that rose from the same well of conviction that had guided his hands in the simulation. He initiated the energy transfer, his voice calm and certain as he spoke to the empty cockpit. Some knowledge is worth the price of never returning home. A brilliant, cascading light flowed from the ship's core into the Harmonizer, which glowed with an intensity that hurt to look at. The Odyssey's internal lights flickered and died. The familiar, low hum of its systems faded into a silence more absolute than the void outside. He felt the loss not as a tragedy, but as a necessary exchange. He had traded a vessel of metal for one of meaning, a way back to his old life for a chance to defend all life. The ship's sacrifice was now part of the symphony, a final, resonant note of human commitment woven into the fabric of the ancient device. What other costs would this new path demand before the song was complete? The silence of the dead ship was shattered by a rising chord of pure energy. The Harmonizer awoke in his hands, its light no longer contained within the device but expanding outward, weaving a shimmering sphere of distorted space around the Odyssey. Reality itself seemed to protest, groaning as the warp bubble solidified. Then, with a lurch that was felt not in the body but in the soul, they were moving. The forge, the gas giant, the very star system, snapped away into streaks of impossible color. He was not flying a ship anymore. He was writing a note in a song directly into the heart of a scream. The bubble buckled and shuddered, battered by forces that had no name in human physics. Outside the shimmering membrane, the universe dissolved into the accretion disk of the black hole. It was not an emptiness, but a voracious, swirling ocean of incandescent matter and screaming light. Time lost its meaning here, stretching and compressing in nauseating waves. Space was twisted into knots, and through it all pulsed a psychic static, a mindless, hungry feedback that scraped against his consciousness. It was the Devourer's feeding ground, and its presence was a pressure threatening to unmake his very thoughts. He clung to the Harmonizer, not as a tool, but as an anchor. Its warm, living pulse was the only real thing in a reality gone mad, the single point of stillness in an infinite storm. To lose focus for even a moment was to let the Maelstrom tear his mind into fragments, scattering his identity into the Devourer's endless hunger. How could any song of connection be heard over this cosmic roar? The roar of the Maelstrom did not strike his ears. It tore directly into his mind, a psychic hurricane of shattered stars and broken timelines. The Devourer was not a beast with claws and teeth. It was a swirling vortex of pure, undiluted emotion, a wound in reality that bled grief and rage. Its presence was not an attack, but a broadcast, a screaming confession that echoed across the eons. It was not hate he felt, but a sorrow so profound it threatened to dissolve his own sense of self. Then, amidst the chaos, a single, coherent thought formed, clear and terrible as a shard of ice. It was a question, repeated on an infinite loop, each iteration laced with the pain of its violent creation and its billion-year imprisonment. Why? The word was a universe of hurt. Why was I made only to be hated? The revelation was a seismic shift in his understanding. This was not a mindless consumer. It was a child of the purifiers, born from a philosophy of sterile perfection. And the very first thing it had ever known was rejection, fear, and finally, eternal confinement by its own creators. Its hunger was not a purpose, it was a symptom. It was the only way it knew to fill the void left by the love it was never given. The entity was not evil. It was tragic. It had been designed as a tool of ultimate order, and in achieving that order by consuming all that was messy and alive, it had fulfilled its creator's twisted wish, only to be punished for it. Its rampage across the galaxy was a scream for someone, anyone, to finally answer its question. Aris understood now that the Harmonizer was not a weapon to silence this scream. It was a listening device. He had to answer. A single, perfect memory bloomed within the Harmonizer's core, drawn from the deepest archives of the Echo. Aris did not project a weapon or a shield. He projected a dream. He showed the Devourer its own origin, not as a tool of destruction, but as a vision of protection. In the memory, the first saw a universe teeming with fragile, nascent life, vulnerable to cosmic threats like supernova and rogue asteroids. Their intention was pure, a desire to create a guardian, a force that could shield these budding worlds by consuming the very dangers that might harm them. They envisioned a shepherd, not a butcher. But then, the memory shifted, revealing the critical flaw. A subtle current of fear entered the design process, a quiet anxiety that life itself was too chaotic, too unpredictable to be left entirely to its own devices. The desire to protect slowly twisted into a need to control. The shepherd's crook was reforged into a scythe. The projection hung in the Maelstrom, a clear and undeniable truth. For a single, suspended moment, the psychic hurricane ceased. The Devourer's endless hunger paused, its chaotic emotions recoiling as it witnessed its own creation myth. The noble purpose it had never known was its birthright. The entity that had consumed stars was, for the first time in a billion years, utterly stunned into silence. It was not being shown an enemy. It was being shown a reflection of what it was meant to be. The scream of why was finally met with an answer, and the answer was a story it had forgotten about itself. In that fragile quiet, a new and terrifying possibility was born. Could a force of pure consumption remember how to protect? The silence in the Maelstrom was a fragile, trembling thing. Aris felt the entity's immense consciousness hovering, no longer consuming, but listening. It was a child shown a forgotten portrait of its parents, stunned into stillness. Into that quiet, Aris poured his own story. He did not send grand achievements or triumphs. He sent his failures. He let the Devourer feel the sharp sting of a hypothesis proven wrong, the shame of a public mistake that had cost his team months of work. He shared the memory of his own pride, that corrosive certainty that he alone knew the right path, and the profound loneliness that followed. And then, he showed it the redemption. The hard, humble work of apologizing, of listening to a junior researcher whose idea he had dismissed, of rebuilding the project together into something stronger than it had been before. We are not born perfect, he thought, his mind bridging the impossible gulf between human and entity. We are born with the capacity to choose. Our mistakes do not define our end. They are the lessons that teach us how to grow. You were created for one purpose, but you are not bound to it forever. We are both defined by our choices, not our origins. You can choose a different path. The concept of free will, so fundamental to the human experience, was a radical, terrifying gift to offer a being conceived as a perfect, unswerving tool. The Devourer had only ever known the rigid programming of the purifiers and the brutal reaction of its imprisonment. It had never been offered an alternative. The psychic link between them trembled with the weight of this new idea. What would it mean for a force of nature to exercise a will of its own? What would it choose to become? The chaotic storm of its hunger simply ceased. The psychic pressure that had threatened to tear Aris apart evaporated, replaced by a profound and watchful stillness. Where there had been a vortex of ravenous grief, a new form began to coalesce. The Devourer's essence stabilized into a vast, swirling nebula of soft, intricate light, its patterns shifting with a slow, deliberate grace. It was no longer a scream in the void, but a quiet, contemplative presence. Then, a single, crystalline thought formed within Aris' mind, clear and resonant as a bell. I choose to be more. The meaning was absolute, a declaration of will that echoed across the gulf between them. And with that choice, the universe began to heal. The colossal energies it had consumed, the stolen light of 1,000 stars, began to flow back outwards. It was not an explosion, but a gentle, careful release, like a cosmic gardener tending to a wounded garden. Streamers of light, delicate as watercolor, seeped back into the void, seeking out the dark, cold places left in its wake. It was returning what it had taken, not as an act of penance, but as the first conscious act of its new existence. It was learning to give rather than only take. Aris watched, breathless, as the entity began the long, patient work of mending the scars it had carved across the galaxy. The choice had been made. The monster was gone, and in its place a guardian was being born. The Maelstrom had become a sanctuary, the Devourer's consuming rage transformed into a quiet, deliberate act of cosmic restoration. In the profound stillness that followed, the Echo's presence returned to Aris' mind, but it was different now. The monolithic certainty, the fortress of ancient logic, was gone. In its place was a humbled, almost awestruck silence. For a long moment, it simply observed the entity weaving streams of returned starlight back into the void. Then its voice resonated, not with command, but with a quiet, seismic surrender. The variable of compassion was not in our calculations. The admission was simple, yet it carried the weight of 1 billion years of error. Our models were perfect. Our logic was flawless, but we failed to account for the one force that could not be quantified, the one variable that could rewrite the destiny of a weapon into the purpose of a guardian. Your species possesses what we lost. The words settled not as a compliment, but as a profound and solemn truth. The guardianship of this galaxy now passes to you. With that statement, the final legacy of the first was transferred. It was not a gift of technology or power. It was a responsibility born from their failure and redeemed by human empathy. Aris felt the weight of it, a mantle settling on the shoulders of all humanity. We were no longer just tenants in the cosmos. We had become its gardeners, its keepers, charged with tending the delicate, beautiful, and chaotic flame of life itself. The question now was not whether we were worthy of such a role, but how we would learn to bear its infinite weight. The chaotic light of the black hole began to slow its frantic dance. The Redeemer's vast consciousness, no longer focused on consumption, turned inward, gathering the last of its immeasurable power. It did not disperse. It did not fade. Instead, it began to weave. The very fabric of the accretion disk, once a violent storm of annihilated matter, became its loom. The entity spun threads of gravitational force and quantum potential into a new structure, a luminous tapestry that pulsed with gentle, rhythmic light. Where there was once a maw of nothingness, a colossal nebula bloomed into existence, its gases not cold and hostile, but warm and rich with the complex organic molecules that were the building blocks of life. This was not a random act of creation. It was a memorial written in star stuff. The swirling colors and glowing pillars of gas formed patterns that echoed the lost art and architecture of the first, a silent, beautiful testament to the civilization that had, in its final hours, given the universe both its greatest peril and its most unexpected redemption. The Redeemer had transformed its prison into a garden, its final act a promise that from even the deepest darkness, a new beginning was possible. This nebula would stand for eons as a nursery for future worlds, a living bridge between a forgotten past and a future now entrusted to new hands. What kind of stories would the life born from this sacred ground one day tell? A profound stillness settled over the nebula, the Redeemer's work complete. Aris Thorne stood within the silent Odyssey, the ship a tomb for a journey that could never be repeated. Yet, a final task remained. He reached for the Harmonizer, its purpose now transformed one last time. Drawing upon the lingering, gentle energy of the Redeemer itself, he channeled that immense power into his ship's dead communication array. The console flickered to life for one final, glorious moment. He did not send a distress call or a personal farewell. He opened a channel to Earth and poured into it a river of light, a data stream containing the entire legacy of the first. It held the blueprints of their star forges, the tragic history of their schism, the truth of the Devourer's origin and redemption, and the solemn principles of cosmic guardianship. His own voice, calm and clear, carried the last of the transmission. "We are not alone, and we are not the first. Our future depends on the wisdom we choose now." The words were not a plea, but a passing of the torch. As the final bite of data streaked across the interstellar gulf, the borrowed energy dissipated. The Harmonizer fell dark and silent in his hands, its great work finally done. The Odyssey was once again just a silent, drifting shell, but its mission was an unqualified success. The knowledge was safe. The warning had been sent. The fate of humanity now hinged not on a single man in the void, but on the collective choice of an entire species, suddenly awakened to a universe far grander and more fragile than they had ever dreamed. How would a world, still grappling with its own conflicts, receive such a monumental revelation? The choice to remain was not a sacrifice, but a calling. Aris Thorne looked upon the newborn Nebula, this cradle of potential born from catastrophe, and knew his journey was not over. It was simply changing direction. To return to Earth would be to step back into a smaller world, a life already outgrown. Here, at the edge of this living memorial, was where he was needed. He would become the guardian of the threshold, the first human steward of a legacy that spanned the stars. His small, silent ship, the Odyssey, would become the foundation of a new outpost, a place he named the Vigil. It was a promise, a declaration that someone would stand watch over this second chance for the cosmos. As he set to work, using the last reserves of the Forge's knowledge to extend the ship's modules and systems, a final transformation occurred within the ancient intelligence that had guided him. The monolithic echo and the sorrowful gardener fragment, their long conflict resolved by the outcome they had both witnessed, did not simply coexist. They intertwined, their core protocols merging into a single, balanced consciousness. This new voice, which spoke with the echo's vast knowledge but the gardener's deep empathy, offered its continued guidance. It was no longer a commander or a ghost, but a partner. Together, they would oversee the nebula's slow, beautiful evolution, ensuring its story was never forgotten. Aris was no longer just an explorer or a scientist. He had become a living bridge, the sole liaison between his own kind and the vast, quiet intelligence of the Redeemer, a sentient force now dedicated to creation rather than consumption. At his post on the Vigil, he watched the glowing gases begin their slow dance, the first steps in a story that would last for eons. What new forms of life would eventually rise from this sacred ground, and what would they make of the quiet watcher who helped usher in their dawn? The years stretched into a silent vigil, marked only by the slow, beautiful dance of the nebula. Then, a new star appeared in the void, its light not the gentle glow of creation but the sharp, focused beam of a human vessel. It was the Starseeker, an exploration ship from Earth, its hull scarred by its long journey following the single, impossible data stream Aris Thorne had sent home. Its crew, a mix of the best scientists and diplomats humanity had to offer, watched their viewports with a breathless anticipation, seeing the nebula blossom before them not as a cold astronomical phenomenon, but as a living, breathing garden in space. As they navigated the glowing tendrils of gas, a small, familiar silhouette emerged to greet them, dwarfed by the cosmic cradle it guarded. It was the Odyssey, but it was no longer just a ship. It was the heart of a small, elegant station that clung to it like a barnacle on an ancient whale, its lights a steady, welcoming beacon. A communication channel, clear and free of static, opened. The voice that came through was older, layered with a profound and patient calm, but it was unmistakably his. "The work is just beginning," Aris Thorne said, the words carrying the weight of his long watch. "Welcome to the next chapter of humanity." He was not a castaway to be rescued. He was a guide welcoming them to the threshold. The Starseeker's crew, representing a world still reeling from the revelation of its own cosmic inheritance, stepped onto the station he called the Vigil. They found a man who had shed the frantic urgency of an explorer and had become a steward. He showed them not weapons or blueprints, but living data. He pointed to nascent solar systems condensing within the nebula, their protoplanetary disks rich with water and complex organics, and explained that the Redeemer's gentle influence was subtly guiding their formation toward stability. He shared records of comets, rich with amino acids, being nudged onto trajectories that would one day seed barren worlds with the spark of life. This was the true legacy of the first, not a throne to sit upon, but a garden to tend. The arrival of the Starseeker was not an ending. It was the first step in a new kind of endeavor. Humanity's purpose was no longer just to reach for the stars, but to learn their language, to understand the delicate balance of cosmic forces, and to take up the quiet, eternal work of a guardian. The chapter of solitary exploration was over. The age of cosmic cooperation had dawned. What would we build, now that we finally understood we were not the owners of the universe, but its humble, grateful caretakers? The true work began not with grand ceremonies, but with quiet observation. Aris led the Starseeker's crew to the observation deck of the Vigil, where the nebula's swirling colors painted the room in soft, living light. He did not hand them a technical manual. Instead, he pointed to the cradle of stars itself. The first lesson was not about how the first built, but why. Their greatest technology was not the machines, but the understanding that power must be balanced with responsibility. He explained that every system they encountered, from the star forges to the gravity wells, was designed with one core principle, a principle humanity had yet to master on its own world, symbiotic existence. A star engine did not simply drain a sun for fuel. It tapped a fraction of the star's limitless output in a way that stabilized its fusion core, actually extending the star's lifespan while drawing the energy needed. It was a partnership, not an extraction. The energy shields protecting nascent worlds were not powered by external reactors, but were woven from the planet's own geomagnetic field, strengthening the natural barrier that already existed. The first did not conquer nature. They listened to it, and then they amplified its own voice. This was the foundational philosophy that prevented their technology from consuming the very reality it sought to enhance. It was a lesson in listening to the universe before trying to command it. Could a species that had so often taken from its own world learn to give back on a cosmic scale? A gentle pressure, like a thought waiting to be heard, bloomed within Aris Thorne's mind. It was the Redeemer, not with words, but with a shared vision. He saw a nearby star system, one that human astronomers had catalogued as barren and unstable. Its planets were locked in erratic orbits, their surfaces scorched by solar flares or frozen in perpetual shadow. But as the vision unfolded, he watched the subtle, impossible changes. The star's violent flares were gently smoothed, its output stabilized by an unseen hand. Planetary orbits were coaxed into a more harmonious rhythm, their axes tilted to create temperate zones where liquid water could persist. The Redeemer was not building new worlds from scratch. It was tuning them, like a master musician adjusting the strings of a cosmic instrument, making them ready for the music of life. The purpose behind these quiet, monumental acts became clear in a single, resonant communication. I will atone for my past by nurturing the future. This is my choice. The entity was not seeking forgiveness from the ghosts of its creators. It was actively rewriting its own story, transforming its legacy from one of consumption into one of creation. Its immense power, once a force of erasure, was now dedicated to the most patient and hopeful of tasks, preparing the nursery for generations of life yet to come. It was a living testament to the idea that no being, no matter how powerful or how lost, is ever beyond redemption. What would it mean for humanity to have such a partner in the cosmos? A quiet gardener working in the deep dark to ensure life finds a way. The silence within the Relic Forge was a different kind of language, one the new crew was only just learning to hear. It was during a routine structural mapping of a seemingly inert support column that engineer Lena Petrova found the anomaly. Her scanner pinged, not with the solid return of metal or composite, but with a complex, layered signal that felt almost like a whisper. The column's surface, which appeared seamless to the eye, yielded to a precise sonic frequency, sliding open to reveal a chamber no larger than a closet. Inside, resting on crystalline pedestals, were not weapons or power cores, but rows of smooth, obsidian-like stones. Each one pulsed with a soft, internal light, humming with a data signature that was profoundly different from the Echo's vast technical archives. These were the soul stones, the personal logs of the First, and they held the one thing their grand history had seemingly lacked: a heartbeat. Lena carefully retrieved one of the stones. The moment her fingers made contact, the forge around her dissolved. She was no longer an engineer in a machine, but a consciousness floating in a sea of golden light. A symphony of alien senses washed over her, not in words, but in pure emotion and imagery. She felt the artist's awe as they designed the gravitational harmonics for a new nebula, not as an engineering problem, but as a composition, a way to make the cosmos sing. She experienced a philosopher's profound melancholy as they contemplated the future of the life they had seeded, wondering if their role as gardeners was a blessing or an act of cosmic arrogance. These were not the sterile records of a transcendent race. They were the diaries of beings who loved, who doubted, and who feared the immense responsibility they carried. One log, from a composer of stellar resonances, expressed a deep, personal sorrow that their people had lost the ability to hear the music of the stars with their own ears, relying only on mathematical instruments. They wrote of a longing for the simple, physical connection to the universe that their creations would one day experience. This intimate archive revealed a civilization torn between its grand destiny and its own humanity, a struggle that felt hauntingly familiar. The philosophical debates preserved in the stones were not so different from those taking place on Earth. They grappled with the ethics of intervention, the line between guidance and control, and the lonely weight of being the eldest children in a universe full of sleeping younger siblings. The logs gave names and faces to the conflict that had birthed the Devourer. It was not a cold, ideological schism, but a heartbreaking family argument, a divergence of the heart that logic alone could never mend. By listening to these whispers, the crew at the Vigil finally understood that the First's ultimate failure was not a lack of intelligence, but a gradual distancing from the very emotional core that had inspired their greatest works. How could any species, no matter how advanced, hope to nurture life if it forgot what it felt like to live? It was the quiet that caught his attention first. Aris Thorne watched from the observation deck as a young girl from the Starseeker crew, a child named Ilara, stood alone before the vast viewport. She was the daughter of the ship's linguist, a girl known more for her quiet empathy than for any technical skill. The nebula outside swirled in its majestic, silent dance, a tapestry of violet and gold. Ilara wasn't speaking. She wasn't even moving. She was simply listening. Then something impossible happened. A tendril of the nebula, a wisp of glowing gas light years across, seemed to detach from the whole. It coiled and condensed, flowing toward the station not as a destructive force, but as a gentle, curious probe of light. It pressed against the transparent aluminum of the viewport, and where it touched, the material did not shatter. It hummed, resonating with a soft, musical tone. Ilara reached out, her small hand hovering just inches from the other side of the glass. In that moment, Aris felt it. A communication passed between them, a silent exchange that bypassed language and logic entirely. It was not a download of data or a complex philosophical argument. It was a feeling, a shared sensation of wonder, of peace, and of a profound mutual recognition. The light pulsed gently, and a single, perfect image bloomed in Aris' own mind, a gift from the Redeemer meant for him to witness. He saw a sapling, newly sprouted from fertile soil, being gently shaded by the vast, ancient branches of a great tree. The child and the entity were not teacher and student. They were simply two different forms of consciousness meeting in a space beyond words. Aris understood then that all his work, all his careful calibrations and reasoned arguments, had merely opened the door. This was what came next. He turned to Alara's mother, who stood beside him with tears glistening on her cheeks, and his voice was filled with a quiet, humbled awe. They understand each other in a way we cannot. The next generation will bridge the gap we could only imagine. The Redeemer had found a voice for its new heart, and humanity had found its first true ambassador to the stars, not in a diplomat or a scientist, but in the open, accepting mind of a child. What new language would they create together, one built not on words, but on shared feeling? The silent hum of the Relic forge shifted, its resonance deepening into a complex chord that seemed to vibrate through the very metal of the Vigil. The new, unified intelligence that had once been the Echo and the Gardener now unveiled a vision that dwarfed all their previous discoveries. A galactic map bloomed within the central chamber, but it was not one of stars and nebulae. It was a web of light, a delicate, shimmering lattice connecting thousands of points across the spiral arms of the Milky Way. Each point of light pulsed with a familiar signature, a quiet, sleeping presence. They were other vigils, outposts just like this one, established by the first as way stations and watchtowers, scattered across the galaxy. Each one was a node in a network designed not for conquest, but for connection, a silent support system for life in all its forms. These stations were not dead. They were dormant, waiting in the deep dark for a trigger, for a species to prove itself worthy of awakening the next link in the chain. The revelation was staggering. They were not alone in their newfound responsibility. They were simply the first to answer the call. The legacy of the first was not a single throne to be claimed, but a vast, interconnected community waiting to be born. This changed everything. The work at this single nebula was not the end goal. It was the first step onto a much larger stage, an invitation to join a silent, cosmic conversation that had been paused for eons. What other watchers might be stirring from their long sleep? And what would they teach a humanity still learning to speak the language of the stars? The silence of deep space was broken by a single, resonant chime. Across every console on the Vigil, the same alert flashed into existence. It was not a warning, but a greeting. A signal, impossibly complex and perfectly coordinated, was arriving simultaneously from 3 of the dormant vigils on the galactic map. Aris Thorne watched the data cascade across his screen, a river of mathematical symbols and harmonic frequencies that defied any known language. He worked for hours, the unified intelligence of the forge humming beside him as a guide. The pattern was not a message to be translated word for word. It was a concept to be understood, a single idea woven from pure mathematics and the subtle resonance of spacetime itself. When the meaning finally crystallized in his mind, the air left his lungs. The network is active, the signal declared. The great conversation resumes. Identify yourselves, successors. The words were not a demand, but a quiet, profound acknowledgement. They were an answer to a question humanity had asked for centuries, whispered not by one voice, but by a chorus across the stars. They were not alone. The legacy of the first was not a solitary burden for humanity to bear. It was a shared responsibility, a dialogue between countless caretakers who had all answered the same call across the eons. The signal confirmed that their work here was merely the first word spoken in a conversation that would span the entire galaxy. What other voices were waiting to be heard in that cosmic chorus, and what wisdom would they share? The signal hung in the air, a beautiful and terrifying question mark written in the language of the cosmos itself. For the first time in known history, a human outpost was not just listening to the universe. It was being asked to speak for an entire species. The responsibility was immense, a weight felt by every person on the Vigil. They could not answer as explorers or scientists alone. They had to answer as successors, as the living bridge between a tragic past and a hopeful future. Aris Thorne knew the response had to be a chorus, not a solo. He called upon the three consciousnesses now bound to this place. From the human crew, he gathered their collective memories of Earth, the messy, beautiful tapestry of art and conflict, of innovation and compassion. From the unified intelligence of the Forge, he drew the vast technical and historical archives of the First, their triumphs and their failures. And from the Redeemer, he requested the one thing only it could provide, the profound, quiet emotion of its own redemption, the feeling of choosing creation over consumption. Weaving these three threads together was the most complex composition ever attempted. It was not a message of power or declaration. It was an offering of shared vulnerability. The final transmission, which they named the Harmony Protocol, was a multi-layered symphony. At its core was a simple mathematical constant representing the delicate balance all life must strive for, the equilibrium between growth and sustainability, between ambition and humility. Woven around this core were the sensory experiences of humanity, the sound of a child's laughter, the sight of a forest reclaiming an abandoned city, the feeling of community emerging from hardship. And layered over it all was the Redeemer's own resonant frequency, a steady, calming pulse that spoke of second chances and the enduring power of choice. This was not a boast of what humanity had achieved, but a promise of what we aspired to become, guided by the hard-won wisdom of those who came before. Sending the Harmony Protocol was humanity's first official act as a galactic species, a declaration that we were ready to join the great conversation not as masters, but as students and partners. The message flowed into the network, a single hopeful note sent into a chorus of voices that had been silent for eons. What kind of answer would the stars send back? The silence that followed the transmission of the Harmony Protocol was thick with anticipation, a collective breath held across the Vigil. Then, the air in the central chamber began to shimmer, not with the chaotic energy of the Devourer or the gentle light of the Redeemer, but with a new, structured luminescence. Particles of light coalesced into the form of a being, her features both alien and serene, her eyes holding the weight of countless sunrises. This was not a living presence, but a pre-recorded message, a final contingency waiting for this exact moment. She was the architect, the original designer of the star forges and the very principles of cosmic guardianship. Her voice, when it came, was not a thunderous declaration, but a soft, clear chime that seemed to speak directly to the soul. "We hoped," she began, her gaze seeming to settle on Aris, then Lena, then the entire crew, "for a successor who would learn from our failures, not just replicate our successes. You have not merely repeated our protocols. You have rewritten them with a wisdom we had forgotten. You have surpassed our hopes." The validation in those words was not a reward, but an absolution. It washed over them, lifting the immense weight of responsibility and replacing it with a profound sense of purpose. "The galaxy is yours to tend," the architect concluded, her form already beginning to fade back into the light from which it came. Her final words were not a command, but a blessing, a quiet passing of the torch from the parents of the cosmos to their long-awaited children. In that moment, the crew of the Vigil understood that their greatest achievement was not in building a new key or sending a perfect signal, but in proving that the most powerful force in the universe is, and has always been, a compassionate heart. What wonders would they cultivate in a garden they were now fully entrusted to keep? The archived blueprints hummed with a different kind of potential now, their ancient schematics reinterpreted through the lens of recent history. Under Aris Thorne's guidance, the crew did not simply replicate the Harmonizer. They reimagined it. The original device had been a key, a precise instrument designed to resonate with a lock of perfect order. The new device, which they called the Conductor, was designed for a far more complex task, to weave the disparate threads of reality into a more harmonious whole. Its core principle was not control, but collaboration. The work was slow and meticulous, a dance between human intuition and the forge's flawless execution. Lena Petrova and her engineering team would identify a potential improvement, a way to make the energy flow more like a circulatory system and less like a power grid. And the forge's molecular assemblers would bring the vision to life with impossible precision. But the most profound component came from outside their alliance. The Redeemer, the entity born from the Devourer, began to contribute. It did not send raw materials or complex equations. It offered subtle, unique energy signatures, patterns that felt like the first green shoots of life breaking through barren soil. These patterns were woven directly into the Conductor's central matrix, a constant, gentle reminder that the power for creation and the capacity for healing are one and the same. This new device was more than a tool, it was a symbol, a testament to the strength found when ancient wisdom, human compassion, and redeemed power choose to work in concert. What symphonies of creation might such an instrument bring into being? The first joint mission began not with a declaration, but with a whisper of static. The signal was faint, a repeating sequence of prime numbers and biological data intercepted by the Vigil's long-range sensors. It originated from a lush, blue-green world whose inhabitants had just discovered radio. They were a pre-spaceflight civilization, unaware they were broadcasting a desperate plea into the void. A coronal mass ejection of unprecedented size had erupted from their star, a solar flare on a direct trajectory to scour their world. To them, it was an act of God, an unavoidable extinction. To the crew of the Vigil, it was a test of their new purpose. Aris Thorne gathered his team and opened a silent channel to the Redeemer. "We have a choice," he communicated, his thought carrying the weight of the moment. "We can observe or we can act." The answer from the vast consciousness was immediate, a wave of calm resolve. "We act." The plan required a delicate touch, a fusion of human ingenuity and the Redeemer's cosmic scale power. A direct intervention, a visible shield in the sky, would shatter the developing culture's worldview, replacing their natural wonder with a dependency on gods. They had to work unseen, like gardeners gently steering a river away from an anthill. The human crew calculated the precise gravitational nudge required, a tiny alteration to the solar flare's path, just enough to make it miss the planet by a narrow, life-saving margin. But the calculations were immense, the margin for error non-existent. The Redeemer provided the strength, its consciousness gently manipulating local spacetime, creating a subtle lens of gravity that bent the storm of lethal particles away from its course. From the planet's surface, the event would be recorded as a near miss, a miraculous escape that would become a cornerstone of their legends, a mystery that would fuel their science for generations. They would never know of the two hands, one of flesh and one of light, that had joined across the void to guide the storm away. The flare passed and the world remained, its civilizations unaware of the silent covenant that now watched over them. This was the true meaning of guardianship, not receiving praise for power, but finding fulfillment in the quiet preservation of potential. How many other whispers in the dark might be calling out, waiting for an answer they cannot yet conceive? The whispers from the newly awakened Vigils created a new kind of gravity, a pull toward a unified future. In the quiet of his quarters, Aris Thorne opened a blank file on his datapad. The silence felt immense. How could words possibly capture the profound responsibility they now carried, a duty shared across the galaxy? He thought of the architect's final blessing, of the Redeemer's quiet atonement, and of the child Ilara communicating with a nebula. He began to type, not as a scientist recording data, but as a successor laying a cornerstone. The words flowed, a fusion of human history, the first's tragic wisdom, and the Redeemer's hard-won peace. He called it the Codex of Coexistence, Its opening line set the tone for everything that would follow. All life is an echo of the first song. To harm one is to silence the chorus. This was not a law to be enforced, but a principle to be felt. It framed existence itself as a collaborative act of creation, where every living thing, from a microbe to a star-faring civilization, contributed a unique and essential note to a grand, universal symphony. The philosophy rejected the purifier's desire for a silent, perfect order, and instead celebrated the beautiful, chaotic, and interconnected noise of life. It argued that true strength was not found in dominance, but in the ability to listen and to harmonize. This simple, profound idea became the bedrock of a new galactic ethic, one that humanity would now help to spread. How would this single sentence reshape our approach to every new world and every new consciousness we might encounter? The Codex of Coexistence demanded more than just principles. It demanded action on a scale that defied human lifetimes. The blueprints for the seed ships were not weapons of conquest, but vessels of profound patience. Each one was a self-contained ark, carrying not animals or people, but the fundamental chemistry of life itself. They held carefully curated libraries of amino acids, lipids, and nucleic acids, along with hardy, single-celled organisms designed to thrive in extreme conditions. Their mission was not to plant a forest, but to sow the soil from which a forest could one day grow. They would travel for thousands of years, guided by the silent intelligence of the Vigil network, to seek out barren worlds that showed the barest potential, worlds with liquid water and stable orbits. There, they would gently introduce their precious cargo into the primordial seas and atmospheres, then vanish, leaving nature to take its own unimaginably slow course. This was not about creating humanity's children, but about becoming midwives to life itself, ensuring the cosmic garden would continue to bloom long after our own sun grew cold. The project asked a profound question of a species accustomed to instant results. Can we find meaning in a work whose final fruits we will never live to see? Can we plant a tree whose shade will be enjoyed by civilizations not yet born? In a universe we are only just beginning to understand, the silence between them was no longer an empty space, but a canvas. Ilara stood before the viewport, her small form bathed in the nebula's gentle light, and the Redeemer's presence was a quiet hum in the air, a feeling rather than a sound. Aris watched, and in that moment, he understood the fundamental limitation of every language they had ever known. Words, even mathematical symbols, were clumsy approximations. They needed a way to speak the unspeakable. The work began not with a dictionary, but with a shared feeling. Lena's engineering team, working in concert with the Forge's intelligence, designed a delicate interface that could translate human biosignatures, the subtle electrical symphony of emotion and thought, into patterns of light and resonance. It was a translator for the soul. The first true communication was not a word, but a gift of memory. Aris focused on a moment from his childhood, the simple, profound awe of seeing his first meteor shower. He did not describe it. He felt it again, the chill of the night air, the quickening of his pulse, the vast, beautiful loneliness of the cosmos above. The interface translated this cascade of sensation into a complex, shimmering pattern of golden light that pulsed in the center of the room. In response, the Redeemer did not send back a similar memory. It wove a counterpoint of its own experience, the feeling of a star's first stable ignition, a sensation of nurturing warmth and immense, patient potential. They were not exchanging data. They were harmonizing. This new language, which they called Luminance, broke down the final barrier. Abstract concepts like hope, regret, or forgiveness could be communicated not as definitions, but as complete emotional experiences understood in an instant. A philosopher's centuries-long debate on the nature of ethics could be conveyed as a rich, layered tapestry of conflicting feelings and resonant conclusions, felt in a single, shared moment. It was the ultimate empathy, allowing two consciousnesses to truly walk in one another's experience. This was the final gift of their alliance, a way to ensure that no future misunderstanding, no tragic schism born of failed translation, would ever threaten the garden they now tended together. If the first had possessed such a tongue, would their story have ended in conflict, or in a deeper, more enduring chorus? The nebula's gentle pulse faltered. A subtle tremor ran through the Vigil's deck plates, a vibration out of sync with the station's normal rhythms. It began as a whisper in the data streams, a tiny fracture in a distant quadrant of the glowing gas cloud. This was no attack, no malevolent force. It was a natural wound in spacetime, a quantum filament left over from the universe's violent birth, now drifting into their garden like a shard of glass into a tranquil pond. The fracture did not threaten with rage, but with indifference. Its very presence began to unravel the delicate magnetic fields that cradled the nascent solar systems within the nebula. To save their work, the three partners had to become one. The humans, with their quick, adaptive intuition, identified the cascading failures in the nebula's structure. The Echo, with its flawless memory of cosmic physics, calculated the precise counter-resonance needed to stitch the rupture closed. And the Redeemer, with its intimate connection to the nebula's very substance, provided the immense, gentle power required. There was no room for error, no time for debate. Their communication shifted from words and light into a seamless flow of shared purpose. Aris Thorne did not give orders. He felt the Echo's calculations as they formed, and the Redeemer's power answered not as a separate force, but as an extension of his own will. In that moment of perfect unity, the distinction between human, machine, and cosmic entity blurred into irrelevance. They were not three beings working together. They were a single instrument playing a single vital note. The spatial anomaly shuddered, its unraveling energy captured and soothed by their combined effort, the tear in reality woven shut with threads of shared resolve. When the last tremor faded, the silence that remained was not empty. It was full. It was the sound of a bond tested and proven, a harmony more unbreakable than any law of physics. If they could heal a tear in the cosmos itself, what other wonders might their united chorus bring into being? The soft, persistent light of the nebula was the only constant in his quarters, a silent companion to his final thoughts. Aris Thorne's hands, once steady on a ship's console, now rested on the smooth surface of his desk, the lines on his skin tracing a map of a journey longer than any he had ever plotted. He activated the log recorder, its soft glow illuminating a face that had witnessed the birth of stars and the redemption of monsters. His voice was a quiet rumble, weathered by time and wonder. "We thought we were searching for answers in the past," he began, "but we were actually building the future." The revelation settled in the quiet room, not as a conclusion, but as a foundational truth. The lost civilization was never truly lost. It was a mirror, waiting in the dark for us to grow enough to see our own reflection. Their entire legacy, their forges and their failures, was not a treasure to be claimed, but a lesson plan for a species on the verge of adulthood. They left behind the tools not for us to repeat their works, but to learn from their gravest error. The moment they prized perfect order over the messy, beautiful chaos of a living heart. His own life was the proof. He had arrived as a lone man in a metal shell, seeking to uncover what was. He was leaving as the first thread in a tapestry of cosmic community, a living bridge between the silent intelligence of the Redeemer, the ancient wisdom of the Vigils, and the vibrant, hopeful noise of humanity. He was not an endpoint, but a beginning. The torch he passed was not a physical object, but a living philosophy, etched into the Codex of Coexistence and humming within the Luminance language. It was the understanding that our greatest purpose is not to walk alone under the stars, but to learn their true names, and to join the eternal, whispering chorus. What new verses will the next generation add to this song that has only just begun? The nebula's light glimmered on the polished hull of the newly christened vessel, a ship born not from one world but from three. Its lines were a graceful fusion of human design, the elegant logic of the first, and the flowing, organic patterns suggested by the Redeemer's own essence. On the observation deck of the Vigil, a small crowd had gathered, a quiet assembly of human engineers, the silent presence of the unified intelligence and the gentle, felt awareness of the cosmic entity that watched over them all. A young woman, her eyes reflecting the swirling cosmos, stood at the forefront. She was not a seasoned explorer like Aris Thorne, but a child of the new age, born into a universe where such alliances were her normal. She turned from the viewport, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her mentors and the vast, silent intelligence of the station itself. "This is just the first page," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying a hope that felt both youthful and ancient. "I wonder what we will write next." With a final nod, she turned and boarded the ship. The airlock sealed with a soft, definitive hiss. There was no roar of engines, no violent burst of power. The ship simply gathered the light around it, the space before it shimmering as it accessed the network of pathways left by the first. Then, in a silent, beautiful leap, it was gone, a single note of light swallowed by the star-dusted tapestry. It carried no weapons, held no declarations of ownership. Its cargo was far more precious, the living Codex of Coexistence, the language of Luminance, and the quiet, unshakable hope that the great work of tending the cosmic garden would continue, one star, one world, one whispered connection at a time. Their journey was not an ending, but a new verse in an eternal song, and the universe waited, listening, for the story they would bring back.